Hello and welcome to the Bulletin with UBS on Monocle Radio. Each week, the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in finance take you beyond the numbers and hype, right to the heart of the big issues of the day. This past week, the World Economic Forum Annual Meeting 2025 convened global leaders up in the High Alps to address key global and regional challenges. These include responding to geopolitical shocks, stimulating growth to improve living standards, and stewarding a just and inclusive energy transition. The WEF this time around was looking through a lens of collaboration for the intelligent age. To look back on the week and to unpack his recent blog on the threat of scapegoat economics published around the WEF, I'm delighted to say we're once again joined by Paul Donovan, Chief Economist in UBS Global Wealth Management. Paul Donovan, always great to chat to you, and I think interesting, obviously, to look at what you've been musing about during the World Economic Forum, of course, in Davos. And before we talk about some of your pronouncements, just give me a quick thought in terms of narratives. Obviously, the lens of the WEF this edition was collaboration for the intelligent age, and we had the same convening of all sorts of diverse global leaders. What did you make, Paul, in terms of pronouncements that came out of from Davos up in the High Alps last week? Anything catch your attention in particular?
Well, of course, for a gathering that was supposed to be looking at collaboration, there was a certain amount of perhaps disunity that was coming through. President Trump from the United States gave a televised address at Davos, which seemed to suggest, for example, universal tariffs was quite nationalistic in tone and has not particularly stressed the collaboration that the summit was looking to achieve. So I think that it is a mixture of aims and ambitions towards collaboration from certain groups, but then also the flip side of that, the rise of economic nationalism in particular, was on display. And this, I think, is going to be an area of ongoing tension, which hopefully, gatherings like the World Economic Forum can try and resolve. But, the modern politics has perhaps undermined a little bit of what Davos was trying to achieve.
Yeah, well, Paul, let's then talk a little bit about scapegoat economics. I know this is what you were writing around in the sort of context of Davos, and actually some of the ideas that you've just mentioned and some of the agendas maybe speak to this. Just tell me first of all about scapegoat economics. I think we can sort of think, we can read between the lines, right? But tell me what scapegoat economics is all about.
So scapegoat economics is when people are scared about the future, and that can be scared because of technology, because of social change, because the norms that they have grown up with all now seem to be turned upside down. And of course, in what we call the fourth industrial revolution, there's a lot of this around. Artificial intelligence is just the latest in a long series of technological changes that really cause people concern about the future. And that insecurity has very, very complex causes behind it. But what it tends to do is then encourage a desire to find someone to blame. Humans always crave simplicity. And the easiest thing to do is to say, it's not my fault, it's all the fault of, and then pick on a specific group. And what we tend to find when you get these episodes of scapegoat economics is two groups tend to be targeted. So the first is any group that has recently made strides towards achieving equality. So if you look back in the 1970s, a lot of scapegoat economics was directed against women who had been moving very slowly, but moving towards equality in the workforce, equal pay, taking a larger role in the economy. And they became a target because, if everything's changing and I don't like change, I'll go after one of the things that has changed. Today, I think it is very much the LGBTQ plus community that is a target, because we've had some small steps in some countries towards equal rights, more equal treatment. And again, that is a group that now has become a target. The second group that tends to be targeted with scapegoat economics is foreigners. Because foreigners, whether we're talking about foreign countries or whether we're talking about foreign immigrants, they are different to us. They don't have the same cultural background, and therefore we can very easily that group. They are other than we are. And that group then also becomes a target. And so scapegoat economics today, we are seeing a certain amount of homophobia coming in, officially attempts to roll back, moves towards treating people equally. But we're also seeing a lot of economic nationalism where foreigners are being demonized in one form or another and blamed for the insecurities that people are feeling.
Well, yeah, Paul, and in your report, you write that the natural result of scapegoat economics is prejudice politics. And you and I have spoken so often before about the economic harm as well as the general societal and human harm of prejudice. And we see this with rollbacks on DEI initiatives and so forth. And you've already mentioned some of Trump's pronouncements. What's the jeopardy here? And how clear is that line that, reducing diversity in the workplace in particular compounds the sort of damage that you're already talking about? And I guess most importantly, what can we actually do to mitigate that, or ideally stop it altogether?
Well, what we are seeing, I think, is, as you said, a combination of these scapegoats causing prejudice politics. So we have the trade protection, capital account protection. So it's not just we are going to tax people who buy foreign goods. It's also we're going to stop people buying our companies, buying our assets, or we're going to stop our companies buying overseas assets. There's lots of different forms of nationalism there. And that's an example of prejudice politics coming into action. But then we also are seeing, as you said, this rollback of DEI initiatives and specific attacks on certain groups, removing their rights, in some cases denying their absolute existence. Now, what this does is create a number of problems for a business because firstly, if you are going to be undermining groups in society, not giving them equal rights, then that is going to be very demoralizing. It means that people in those minority groups will tend not to try as hard. You lose potentially talent by ignoring these groups and not allowing them to develop to their full extent. And that's really important today because we need, as many skilled people as possible to make the most of the technological opportunities that come up. You're going to start throwing away talent through, ignoring it or failing to recognize its existence. That becomes very, very negative. We also see, I think, a risk of sort of a monoculture of thinking. We do not want all decisions being taken by white Anglo-Saxon bald men, because that's a very narrow perspective, which does not allow us to fully appreciate all of the opportunities and all of the risks that are being thrown up by structural change and technological change. So by moving away from diverse, inclusive corporates, you are potentially creating a real risk to future business because you're going to miss obvious problems that come up in the future, which somebody from a different background with a different way of thinking might more readily spot. So the real challenge with this, I think, is that if you move into a realm of prejudice politics and if corporates sort of bow to the new trend in politics in that way, you end up putting businesses and profitability in real jeopardy by not employing the best talent, demoralizing your talent, and by potentially having a monoculture of thinking. So what can you do to push back on this? I mean, I think that the role of the corporate, which ultimately should be operating in the interests of its shareholders, looking to profit maximize, pursuing diversity and inclusion is profit maximizing. Because it is getting the right person in the right job at the right time, which is the absolute mantra for economic success. So I think corporates do actually have an incentive to carry on pursuing diverse and inclusive strategies, making sure that everyone in their workplace is treated equally, and so on and so forth. And that can then spill over into society because people who are in employment tend to spend most of their waking hours in work. We spend a majority of our days at work. In that circumstance, if you create a diverse and inclusive culture in the workplace, that will tend to influence the views and beliefs of your employees, and they will hopefully then take that respect for other people and a belief in diversity and inclusion out into society at large. So that, I think, is the way that this trend of economic nationalism, prejudice politics can be pushed back over time. The corporate actually has quite an important role to play in this.
Yeah, and Paul, let me just ask you, because you write in your memo that, there are some pretty depressing events, certainly within the recent past. And if we look at the sort of rise of some of these corporate monocultures, certainly there's people who are in the sort of the front row at Trump's inauguration, for example. But you caution against despondency, and you've already spoken about the role that the other corporates can play and that, the lay individual can play. Why should we not fall into despondency? And you say that there are still plenty enough reasons to hope that we can contain and mitigate prejudice. But you also close by saying the damage of scapegoat economics can be minimized. We must retain that confidence. Well, why do you have that conviction? And what do we need to look to? What white noise do we need to ignore? And what things do we need to focus on in order to retain a positive view?
Well, the first point, I think, is the economic self-interest for companies does give them a very strong incentive to embrace diversity and inclusion, to try and maximize the skills of their workforce. So, just basic capitalist economic instincts will push you in this direction. And ultimately, I think the economic cost of not going down a diverse and inclusive route is very, very clear. There is actually plenty of evidence of this from history. One of my favorite examples from US baseball, when baseball teams were allowed to be racially desegregated. You could have mixed race teams. Some teams embraced that and some teams did not. And the teams which embraced it won more games, performed better economically, attracted more supporters because the play was more entertaining. And the teams which continued along racist lines effectively failed economically and in terms of their sporting achievements. And it's sort of a very nice little snapshot of the economic forces that push you in that direction. In addition, I believe people are generally fundamentally, decent. The majority of humanity, is not excessively prejudiced. We all have our biases, obviously. But I think that the more that we get to know about other people, the less likely we are to be prejudiced. In that, things like social media do play a role, I think, in helping shift the conversation and helping to change attitudes towards prejudice, because the more you know about another group, the less likely you are to be prejudiced against them, because the more you know about other groups, the more you realize they are just like you. And so as people feel that they are able to be the true selves over social media, to be public about it, more people see that, they learn about them, that again helps to push back. So I think these sources will help us to push against the rise of prejudice politics. They will help us to push against scapegoat economics, and I think we should be positive about that. It is not going to be a straight line trajectory. This is not going to be a smooth path. There will be setbacks along the way, of course. But overall, I think that we can push back against this. And of course, the more we push back either as a company or as a society, the more likely it is that we are to prosper in a period of structural change and technological innovation.
That's Paul Donovan bringing us to the end of this edition of The Bulletin with UBS, setting the agenda in the fast-moving world of finance each week, here on Monocle Radio. Listen again and explore more at monocle.com. That's where you can join the club and subscribe to Monocle magazine. You can also follow this show wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to discover more and find out how UBS can help you, head over to ubs.com. This is The Bulletin with UBS on Monocle Radio. I'm Tom Edwards. Thanks for listening.